Static crackled through the headset like broken glass, and dispatcher Margaretchen knew immediately that this wasn't going to be an ordinary night. 23 years on the job had taught her to recognize the calls that would keep her awake for weeks afterward. This was one of them. 911, what's your emergency? The voice that came through was barely a whisper, trembling with a fear so raw it made Margaret's skin crawl. Please help me. I'm trapped in the Desert Rose Motel on Highway 375, and there's something terribly wrong here. Margaret's fingers froze over her keyboard. The Desert Rose Motel. She'd grown up in this county, and she knew that place had been boarded up since 2004. A family of 4 had died there in a gas leak. Or at least, that's what the official report said. Most locals whispered about other things entirely. Ma'am, I need you to speak clearly. What's your name and location? My name is Jessica. Jessica Walsh. I'm in room 237, and I can't get out. The door won't open, the windows are sealed shut, and there are voices coming from walls. Margaret's blood turned to ice water. She dispatched emergency services to that motel twice before. Once for urban explorers who'd claimed to see figures moving in the windows, and once for a missing hiker whose car was found in the parking lot. Both times, the responders found nothing but empty rooms and the lingering smell of something they couldn't identify. Jessica, I need you to stay calm. How did you get into the motel? The building has been condemned for 20 years. A sob echoed through the line. I was driving back from Las Vegas. My car broke down on the highway, and I saw the lights on. The neon sign was working. The office was lit up. There was even a man at the front desk who checked me in. He seemed normal, just his eyes were completely black, and his skin was so pale it looked gray in the fluorescent light. Margaret's hands began to shake. She'd heard similar descriptions before, in reports that were quickly buried in files that mysteriously disappeared from the county archives. Can you describe what you're seeing right now, Jessica? The room looks like it's from the 1980s. Everything's clean, like it was just renovated. But there's writing on the walls that keeps appearing and disappearing. Names, dates, and the word help written over and over in what looks like blood. Through her headset, Margaret could hear something else now, a low humming sound, like electrical wires overloading, punctuated by what sounded like footsteps in the walls. Jessica, I'm sending units to your location right now. Can you tell me if there are any other guests in the motel? That's just it. Jessica's voice was getting more frantic. When I checked in, the parking lot was full of cars. Old cars, new cars, all different decades. But when I looked out my window an hour ago, my car was the only one there. And now even my car is gone. Margaret pulled up the GPS location on her computer and dispatched 2 patrol units, though she knew what they would find. The same thing they always found at the Desert Rose Motel, nothing. Ma'am, help is on the way. I need you to stay on the line with me. Can you tell me about the man at the front desk? What did he say to you? He asked me to sign the guest register. When I looked at it, there were hundreds of names, all in different handwriting, all from different years. Some dates went back to the 1960s. But here's the thing that's making me sick. My name was already there, written in my own handwriting, dated today. The line went quiet except for Jessica's rapid breathing and that persistent humming sound that seemed to be getting louder. Jessica, are you still there? Margaret, how did you know my name was Jessica? I never told you my last name was Walsh. Margaret felt her heart stop. She looked at her call log, and there it was. She had typed Jessica Walsh before the caller had given her full name. But that was impossible. She never did that. She always waited for callers to provide their complete information. I'm not sure. Can you try the door again? I've been trying every few minutes. Wait, something's happening. The humming stopped, and I can hear voices outside my room. They're getting closer. What are they saying? They're calling my name. But it's not just one voice, it's dozens of voices, all saying Jessica over and over, like a chant. And they're coming from above me, below me, from inside the walls. Margaret could hear them now too, filtering through the phone connection. A chorus of voices, some male, some female, some that sounded like children, all repeating the same name in perfect, haunting unison. Jessica, listen to me very carefully. I need you to go to the bathroom and lock the door. The first responders should be there any minute. The bathroom. Oh God, Margaret, I can't go in there. There's something in the mirror. It's not my reflection. It's a woman in a 1960s dress, and she's pointing at something behind me. But when I turn around, nothing's there. The voices outside Jessica's room were getting louder, and Margaret could swear she heard the sound of multiple hands pounding on the door. They're trying to get in. The door is shaking, but there's no one there. I can see under the door crack, and there's no one there, but the pounding won't stop. Jessica, my units are almost there. Just hold on. No. The writing on the walls is changing. It's not names anymore. It's dates, death dates. And Margaret, one of them is today's date. The line went dead. Margaret immediately called her units. Unit 47, what's your status on the Desert Rose Motel? The response came back crackling with static. Dispatch, we're at the location. Building is completely boarded up, has been for years. No signs of entry, no vehicles in the parking lot. Requesting permission to check the perimeter. Permission granted. I need you to do a thorough search. 20 minutes later, the call came back. Dispatch, we've checked every possible entry point. The building is sealed tight. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs that anyone has been here in months. Are you sure about this location? Margaret stared at her call log. The call from Jessica Walsh had lasted 37 minutes. The number showed as disconnected, but when she tried to trace it, the system showed something that made her question her own sanity. The call had originated from inside the Desert Rose Motel, from a landline that had been disconnected in 2004. She opened the county database and searched for Jessica Walsh. What she found made her hands shake so violently she could barely type. Jessica Walsh, age 29, had died in room 237 of the Desert Rose Motel on March 15, 2004. Cause of death: asphyxiation from gas leak. She had been traveling alone from Las Vegas when her car broke down on Highway 375. But according to Margaret's call log, she had spoken to Jessica Walsh for 37 minutes on this night, 21 years after her death. Margaret looked at the clock. It was 3:17 a.m. She noticed something else in the database. Every person who had died at the Desert Rose Motel had died at exactly 3:17 a.m. The phone rang again. Margaret stared at the incoming call display. The number was the same disconnected landline from the Desert Rose Motel. Her hand hovered over the answer button as she realized something that made her blood freeze in her veins. Her shift had started at 11 p.m. She had been on duty for over 4 hours, taking calls, dispatching units, handling the usual Friday night chaos of domestic disputes and traffic stops. But according to her computer, according to every clock in the dispatch center, it was still 11:03 p.m. Time had stopped. The phone kept ringing. Against every instinct screaming at her to walk away, Margaret answered. 911, what's your emergency? The voice was different this time. Male, terrified, gasping for breath. Please help me. My name is David Chun, and I'm trapped in the Desert Rose Motel. I'm in room 151, and there are people outside my door, but they're not really people. They're see-through, and they keep asking me to join them. Margaret's vision blurred. Chun, that was her last name. David Chun was her brother, who had disappeared 15 years ago while driving through Nevada. His car had been found on Highway 375, but he was never seen again. David, she whispered. Margaret? Oh God, Margaret, is that you? I've been trying to call home for so long, but I can never get through. I'm so scared, Margaret. I think I'm dead, but I don't remember dying. Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she realized the horrible truth. Everyone who called 911 from the Desert Rose Motel was already dead. The motel existed in some liminal space between life and death, trapping souls who had died there or nearby, forcing them to relive their final moments over and over again. David, I'm here. I'm going to help you. No, Margaret, you can't help me, but I can help you. You need to leave that building right now. Look around you, really look. Margaret glanced around the dispatch center for the first time since Jessica's call began. The other dispatchers were gone. The supervisors were gone. The building was empty and had been for hours. Dust covered everything, and the only working phone was hers. Margaret, you're not at work anymore. You haven't been for a long time. Check your calendar. Check the date. With trembling hands, Margaret looked at her computer screen. The date showed March 15th, 2025. But that couldn't be right. It had been March 15th yesterday, too, and the day before that. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been taking calls from the Desert Rose Motel every night for weeks, maybe months, and every night ended with her forgetting and starting over again. David, what's happening to me? You died in a car accident 3 months ago, Margaret. You were driving home from work during that blizzard, remember? You went off the road near mile marker 23 on Highway 375, but you can't accept it. So you keep coming back to work, keep taking these calls, keep trying to help people you can't save. The memories came flooding back. The ice on the road, the guardrail, the feeling of flying through the air, the cold, so very cold, and then nothing. But I feel alive, David. I feel real. So do I, Margaret. So does Jessica and all the others. That's what this place does. It traps us in the moments we felt most needed, most important. For you, that's helping people. For us, it's calling for help that never comes. Margaret looked at her hands. They were pale, almost translucent. She could see the desk through them. How do I stop this, David? You have to let go, Margaret. You have to stop trying to save everyone and let yourself move on. But first, you have to understand something. Every person who calls from the Desert Rose Motel is real. They're all trapped here, just like you're trapped there. And the only way any of us can move on is if we help each other accept what we can't change. The phone rang again. Another call from motel. Another soul in torment. Margaret understood now. This was her purgatory, taking calls from the dead, trying to help people she couldn't save, reliving her need to be the person who could fix everything, over and over again. But knowing the truth gave her a choice. She could answer the phone and continue the cycle, or she could finally let go. Margaret looked at the ringing phone, then at her pale, translucent hands, and finally at the empty dispatch center that existed only in her memory. I'm sorry, she whispered to all the voices she couldn't save. I'm so sorry. She stood up from her chair and walked away from the ringing phone. As she reached the door, she heard David's voice one last time. Thank you, Margaret. Now we can all rest. The Desert Rose Motel still stands on Highway 375, boarded up and forgotten. Local authorities have stopped responding to calls from that location, though they still come in occasionally. Always at 3:17 a.m., always from people who died there decades ago. But these days, when the phone rings at dispatch centers across Nevada, no one answers. Some traps are too dangerous, even for the dead.
The GPS had been acting strange for the last 50 miles, flickering between signal bars and showing roads that didn't seem to exist on any map. But when Jake spotted the weathered wooden sign reading Pine Ridge Campground, 5-star rated, established 1967, he felt a wave of relief wash over him and his 3 college friends. Finally, muttered David from the passenger seat, rubbing his tired eyes. I thought we were going to end up sleeping in the car again. The narrow dirt road wound through dense pines that seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of shadows despite the late afternoon sun. Madison pressed her face against the back window, watching the trees grow thicker and more oppressive with each passing mile. This place better have hot showers, she said, her voice carrying a nervous edge that none of them quite understood yet. Tom, squeezed into the middle seat, was scrolling through his phone with increasing frustration. Weird. I can't find this place on any review sites. Not even a website. Maybe they're old school, Jake offered, though doubt was already creeping into his voice. Some family-run places don't bother with the internet. The road opened into a circular clearing, and what they saw made them all fall silent. The campground was immaculate. Too immaculate. Wooden cabins dotted the perimeter, each with perfectly manicured flower beds and freshly painted shutters. A pristine lake stretched beyond the cabins, its surface so still it looked like polished glass. Stone fire pits were arranged in perfect intervals, each surrounded by 4 chairs positioned at precise angles. But there wasn't a soul in sight. Jake parked near what appeared to be the main office, a rustic building with a hand-carved sign that read, "Welcome, campers." The silence that greeted them when he turned off the engine was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just silence, so complete it seemed to press against their eardrums. "Where is everyone?" Madison whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was whispering. They climbed out of the car, their footsteps unnaturally loud on the gravel. The office door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap they could see a dimly lit interior. Jake pushed it open with a long creak that echoed across the empty campground. Inside, everything was frozen in time. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the desk, the pen still uncapped beside it. A cup of coffee sat nearby, still warm to the touch when David cautiously reached for it. The registration book was open, showing entries from just that morning. Bill and Susan Henderson, cabin 7 to 8:30 a.m. The Kowalski family, cabin 12 to 9:15 a.m. Robert Chin, tent site 15 to 10:45 a.m. They were just here, Tom said, running his finger down the list of names. Look, the last entry was this morning. Madison noticed something else that made her stomach tighten. Every entry had a check-in time, but the checkout column was completely blank. Not a single person had left. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and they all jumped. But outside, the trees remained perfectly still. "Maybe there's an event or something," Jake suggested, trying to keep his voice steady. "A group hike or campfire gathering." But even as he said it, none of them believed it. The silence outside wasn't the temporary quiet of an empty space waiting to be filled. It was the profound silence of abandonment. They decided to set up camp anyway. They'd driven 12 hours to get here, and their budget couldn't handle finding another place. Jake filled out their information in the registration book, his handwriting looking stark and lonely beneath all those other names. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and red, they gathered around their fire pit. The flames danced merrily, but somehow failed to push back the darkness that seemed to seep from the surrounding woods like a living thing. "Look," Madison said suddenly, pointing toward cabin 7 where the Hendersons were supposedly staying. "The lights are on." They all turned to look. Sure enough, warm yellow light glowed from the windows, and they could see shadows moving inside. Relief flooded through them like warm water. "Thank God," David laughed. "I was starting to think we'd stumbled into some kind of ghost town." But as they watched, something became clear that made the relief curdle in their stomachs. The shadows weren't moving randomly. They were pacing, back and forth, in perfect rhythm, never stopping, never varying their pattern. Tom stood up, squinting at the cabin. "That's not normal." Jake grabbed a flashlight and started walking toward cabin 7, the others reluctantly following. As they got closer, they could hear something that made their blood run cold. It wasn't voices or music or television. It was footsteps. Endless, mechanical footsteps, pacing across wooden floors. Jake knocked on the door. The footsteps stopped immediately. "Hello," he called. "We're staying at the campground. Just wanted to introduce ourselves." Silence. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed. Back and forth, back and forth. Madison grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But Jake, driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear, peered through the window. What he saw inside cabin 7 would haunt him for the rest of his life. The cabin was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no people, no belongings. Just bare wooden floors and walls. But the shadow continued to pace across the floor, cast by nothing at all. They ran back to their campsite, hearts pounding. But as they reached their fire, they noticed something that made them stop dead in their tracks. Around their camping area, pressed into the soft earth, were dozens of footprints. Fresh footprints. They formed a perfect circle around their camp, as if someone had been walking around and around their site while they were gone. The footprints were all different sizes, all different shoe treads. Men's boots, women's sneakers, children's sandals. But they all shared one terrifying characteristic. They all led away from the campsite and disappeared into the dark woods. Not a single set of prints led back out. "We're leaving," David said, his voice barely controlled. "Right now." But when they reached their car, Jake's keys weren't in his pocket. He searched frantically through his backpack, his jacket, everywhere. Nothing. "I know I had them," he insisted. "I locked the car. I definitely locked the car." Madison checked the car doors. They were unlocked, and sitting on the driver's seat were Jake's keys. But something else was there too. A note, written in careful handwriting on campground stationery. "Welcome to Pine Ridge. Checkout time is never. We hope you enjoy your stay." The handwriting matched every entry in the registration book. As if summoned by their discovery, lights began flickering on in every cabin around the campground. Not the warm, welcoming glow they'd seen before, but harsh, sterile light that made the windows look like dead eyes. And in each cabin, shadows began pacing. Back and forth, all in perfect unison. Tom grabbed the keys from Jake's trembling hands and started the car. But as the engine roared to life, they heard something that made their blood freeze. From deep in the woods came the sound of voices. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all calling out in unison. "Don't leave us alone. Don't leave us alone. Don't leave us alone." The voices were getting closer, and now they could see lights moving through the trees. Flashlights, dozens of them, weaving between the pines in a coordinated search pattern. But the lights moved wrong, bobbing up and down in a rhythm that no human gait could produce. David floored the accelerator, and they shot down the narrow dirt road, trees whipping past their windows. In the rearview mirror, they could see the lights following them, moving impossibly fast through the forest, keeping pace with their speeding car. "The main road," Jake gasped. "If we can just reach the main road." But when they burst out of the tree line onto what should have been the highway, they found themselves back at the campground entrance. The same weathered sign, the same narrow dirt road leading into the pines. "That's impossible," Madison whispered. Tom turned the car around and tried again, taking a different route. But every path led back to Pine Ridge Campground. Every escape route curved back to the same entrance, the same sign, the same tunnel of leaning pines. As dawn approached, they sat in their car at the campground entrance, engine running, afraid to go forward and unable to go back. The voices from the woods had gone silent, and the lights in the cabins had gone dark. But they knew, with horrible certainty, that they were being watched. Jake opened the registration book one more time, and his hands began to shake. At the bottom of the page, in the same careful handwriting, for new entries had appeared. Jake Morrison, tent site 20 to 11:47 p.m. David Chen, tent site 20 to 11:47 p.m. Madison Brooks, tent site 20 to 11:47 p.m. Tom Wilson, tent site 20 to 11:47 p.m. And in the checkout column, next to every single name in the book, someone had written the same thing. Never. The sun rose over Pine Ridge Campground, painting the lake in shades of gold and pink. The morning was perfectly silent, perfectly still. And if any travelers happened to pass the weathered wooden sign reading, Pine Ridge Campground, 5-star rated, established 1967, they might notice 4 more shadows pacing back and forth behind the windows of the main office, keeping perfect time with all the others, waiting for the next guest to arrive and discover that at Pine Ridge, checkout time is never, and the only way out is deeper into the woods where the voices call and the lights dance between the trees, searching always. Searching for new companions to join their eternal vigil in the silence of northern Maine. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. Detective Michael Hayes knew the tone before the words formed, but this death notification was different. "Your grandmother, Margaret Thompson, she's gone, Mike. But there's something else. Something we need you to see at the house. Tonight." Michael had spent childhood summers at the Victorian house on Spadina Avenue. He remembered the dusty attic, Grandma Margaret's roses, and most vividly, the basement door that was always locked. "Don't you ever go down there, Michael," she'd say when his 8-year-old hands reached for the handle. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Now, at 4 a.m., surrounded by police tape and lingering lavender perfume, Michael stared at that door. For the first time in 30 years, it was open. Officer Rodriguez approached with her flashlight. "We found her at the top of the basement stairs. Heart attack." But Mike, she had the key clutched at her hand, like she was trying to lock it again. "What's down there?" "That's what we need to show you. Whatever your grandmother was keeping down there, it's not normal." The basement had been converted into something impossible. Walls lined with hundreds of VHS tapes labeled with dates going back to 1987. An old television hummed in the center. In the corner sat a makeshift living space, bed, blankets, dishes. Recently used. "Was someone living down here?" Michael whispered. Rodriguez pointed to a stack of tapes. "Rebecca, Day 1, 1987. Rebecca, Day 30, 1987. The dates span decades. They watched the first tape. A younger Grandma Margaret spoke to the camera. Day 1 with Rebecca. Subject adjusting well. The camera showed a 20-year-old woman on the bed, waving cheerfully. "Hi, Mom. I love you too." Rodriguez fast-forwarded through tapes from different years, 1995, 2003, 2018. In every one, Rebecca looked identical. Same age, same smile. "That's impossible," Michael breathed. Then they watched a tape from 2019. Rebecca looked different now. Hollow, predatory eyes, sharp teeth, speaking in layered voices. "I can smell them upstairs sometimes." New people. Fresh people. The final tape, dated 3 days ago, showed chaos. Grandma Margaret screaming. "She's gotten out." The camera revealed scratch marks on walls, dark stains on concrete, and an empty corner where the bed used to be. Michael realized the truth. Rebecca was his aunt, supposedly died in a hiking accident in 1987. But something had happened to her in those woods, and his grandparents had kept her in this basement for 32 years. "Where is she now?" he asked.
Gone.
"But look at this." Rodriguez showed marks in the concrete floor, not footprints, but longer impressions with claw marks, leading from the corner to the stairs and out the back door. Michael's phone rang. His neighbor, Mrs. Chin. "Something killed my cat, Michael." Tore him apart with hands. There were human handprints in the dirt, but wrong, too long, with nail marks. They spent the day studying more tapes, learning Rebecca's story. She'd been found in unmapped caves after 3 days missing, changed by something she called the things in the deep places. Over the decades, she transformed from human to something else, nocturnal, predatory, aging backwards into a monster that craved children. Reports came in throughout the day. A woman matching Rebecca's description near houses with children. Always testing, searching. "She's hunting," Chin realized. Looking for the right target. As evening approached, Michael made his decision. "We need to use me as bait. She'll recognize family." They set up in Riverdale Park after dark. Michael sat alone on a bench, calling into the darkness. "Rebecca? It's Michael, Margaret's grandson." After 20 minutes, he heard it, a low humming from the trees. Then she was there, dropping from 20 feet up, landing in a crouch no human could survive. She was still recognizably human, but wrong in every detail. 2 long limbs, clawed fingers, gaunt face with sharp cheekbones, and eyes that reflected light. But when she smiled with predator's teeth, her voice was exactly as he remembered from childhood. "Michael, you grew up so handsome. Just like your father." "Hello, Aunt Rebecca. You smell like Margaret. Like home. Are you here to take me home?" "You know I can't. You know why?" Her expression became confused, sad. "Because of what I am? What the things in the deep places made me." She moved closer with fluid grace. "They whispered to me for 3 days, Michael. About the hunger that never ends, about the sweet taste of innocence. They said I could go home if I brought them something precious. Something young and pure. But you never did. Margaret wouldn't let me. Kept me locked away. But I'm not sick, Michael. I'm evolved. She leaped toward him as Rodriguez fired a tranquilizer dart. It hit Rebecca's shoulder, but only made her angry. She spun toward Rodriguez with inhuman speed, covering 30 feet in a bound. When Chun fired his weapon, Rebecca barely noticed. She reached Rodriguez in seconds, and when it was over, the officer lay unconscious. "Rebecca, stop," Michael shouted. She paused. "I've been hungry for 32 years, Michael. Do you know what that feels like?" "Then why didn't you hurt Grandma Margaret?" Her expression softened. "Because she was trying to help. Even when she locked me away, she never stopped believing I could be fixed. But I can't be fixed. The things in the deep places don't give back what they take. They only offer trades." "What kind of trades?" "My humanity for my hunger. My mortality for my strength. There's a little boy on Gerrard Street, 3 years old. He smells like sunshine and laughter. If I bring him to the deep places, they'll let me come home. Let me be Rebecca Thompson again." Michael made a decision that would haunt him forever. "Take me instead." Her head snapped toward him. "What?" "I'm family. Same bloodline. I've never hurt anyone. Try to be good my whole life. Would that work?" She studied him, something human struggling behind inhuman eyes. "You would sacrifice yourself for a child you've never met?" "Yes." She moved toward him slowly, reached out with one clawed hand, and gently stroked his cheek. "You really are like your father. He would have made the same choice." Then she was gone. The answer came 6 hours later. Detective Kim called Michael to Riverdale Park East. In a clearing near the pond, the ground was torn up as if by explosion. Trees uprooted, benches overturned, and in the center, a perfectly round hole, 6 feet across, going straight down into earth. "We found this around 3 a.m., Kim said. Seismic sensors picked up a disturbance." Michael approached the edge. Too dark to see bottom, but he could smell something rising, ozone and decay, and things buried too long. Carved into a nearby bench were words scratched deep with something sharp. "The trade is made. Rebecca Thompson comes home. The debt is paid." They found scraps of fabric from Rebecca's shirt scattered around the hole. And something else, a small wooden figure of a little girl with pigtails. Michael recognized it immediately. He'd carved it in woodshop class at 12, intending it as a Christmas gift for the aunt he thought had died when he was 5. As the sun rose over Toronto, Michael told Detective Kim everything. The basement, the tapes, what Rebecca had become, and the choice she'd ultimately made. "Do you think she's really gone? Really at peace?" Kim asked. Michael looked out over the park, at the normal Toronto morning beginning around them. Joggers starting their runs, dog walkers emerging, children who would wake up safe, unaware of the horror that had stalked them just hours before. "I think she made the only choice she could live with," he said. "Or the only choice she could die with." The hole was filled within a week. New trees planted. Within a month, you could barely tell anything had happened. But Michael never walked through Riverdale Park without thinking about the deep places, about things that whisper in the dark, and about his Aunt Rebecca, who spent 32 years fighting a hunger she never chose, until she finally found a way to choose something else. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind carries sounds from places that shouldn't exist, Michael swears he can hear Rebecca's voice, not the monster she'd become, but the aunt from childhood, calling from somewhere far away. "Thank you for believing I could choose to be human again." The only thing he knows for certain is that somewhere in Toronto, a 3-year-old boy wakes up every morning safe, never knowing how close he came to disappearing into the dark. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, the chance to make one choice that matters, even if it costs us everything.
The GPS had been useless for the last 40 miles. Marcus pulled his rental car to the side of the narrow Mississippi backroad, gravel crunching under the tires, as Spanish moss draped like funeral shrouds from ancient oaks pressed against his windows. The sun was dying behind the tree line, painting the sky the color of dried blood. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, chasing a story that his editor had dismissed as backwoods nonsense. But Marcus knew better. In 20 years of investigative journalism, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming. The locals in Millfield had been reluctant to talk, their eyes darting away whenever he mentioned the Resurrection Baptist Church. All he'd managed to extract was a trembling whisper from an elderly woman at the gas station. That place burned in '73. Burned with everyone inside. Don't go looking for what ain't meant to be found. But Marcus had found something. Old county records showed 17 deaths in the fire, including Reverend Jeremiah Blackwood and his entire congregation. What the records didn't explain were the recent reports. 3 separate witnesses claimed to have seen the church standing whole and untouched, candles flickering in its windows, the sound of hymns drifting through the Mississippi night. His phone buzzed. No signal. Of course. Marcus stepped out of the car, the humid air wrapping around him like a damp burial shroud. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Just silence, thick and suffocating. He grabbed his flashlight and recorder from the back seat. The narrow dirt path ahead vanished into the darkness between towering pines. According to his hand-drawn map, copied from a 1960s survey, the church should be half a mile through these woods. The beam of his flashlight carved a weak tunnel through the darkness as he started down the path. His footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, each crunch of dead leaves echoing back from the trees like whispered warnings. The air grew colder with each step, despite the August heat that had been suffocating him all day. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, Marcus saw it. A warm, golden glow filtering through the trees ahead. His pulse quickened. He clicked off his flashlight and crept forward, using the tree trunks for cover. Through the branches, he could see a small white church, pristine and perfect, as if it had been built yesterday. Soft candlelight flickered in the windows, and he could hear it now, the low, haunting melody of a hymn he didn't recognize. Marcus checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. The church sat in a circular clearing, surrounded by headstones that seemed to lean inward like crooked teeth. The building itself was exactly as described in the 1970s newspaper accounts. White clapboard siding, a simple steeple, 3 stone steps leading to heavy wooden doors. But it couldn't be here. He'd seen the photographs of the charred ruins, read the fire marshal's report. Nothing could have survived that inferno. The singing grew louder as he approached, and Marcus could make out individual voices now. A man's deep bass, a woman's trembling soprano, children's voices weaving through the melody like silver threads. The hymn was mournful, filled with a longing that made his chest ache. He stepped into the clearing, and the singing stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest like a blanket. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stood frozen, his hand hovering over his recorder. The church waited, its windows glowing like eyes in the darkness. After a long moment, the heavy wooden doors creaked open. "We've been waiting for you," called a voice from the darkness within, deep, resonant, carrying the authority of decades in the pulpit. "Please come in. The service is about to begin." Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to run, but he was a journalist first, and this was the story of a lifetime. He climbed the 3 stone steps, each one colder than the last, and stepped through the doorway. The interior was exactly as described in the historical accounts. Rows of simple wooden pews, a modest altar, oil paintings of biblical scenes on the walls. Candles provided the only light, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their flames. The air smelled of old wood, melted wax, and something else, something sweet and cloying that made his stomach turn. The congregation sat in perfect silence, their backs to him. Men in dark suits that seemed decades out of style, women in simple dresses, with their hair pinned up, children sitting unnaturally still beside their parents. Marcus counted 17 people, just as the record had indicated. "Please," the voice called from the pulpit, where a tall, gaunt figure in black robes stood with his back turned. "Take a seat. We so rarely have visitors." Marcus slipped into the last pew, his hand shaking as he fumbled with his recorder. The device felt ice cold to the touch, and when he pressed record, nothing happened. Dead batteries, though he'd charged it in the car. The figure at the pulpit turned around. Reverend Jeremiah Blackwood was exactly as described in the newspaper clippings, tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. But his skin had a waxy, translucent quality, and when he smiled, Marcus could see that his teeth were blackened stumps. "Welcome, brother," Blackwood said, his voice echoing strangely in the small space. "We gather here tonight to speak of resurrection, of second chances, of the price we pay for salvation." The congregation murmured in agreement, but they still hadn't turned around. Marcus couldn't see their faces, only the backs of their heads and the rigid line of their shoulders. "You see," Blackwood continued, beginning to pace behind the pulpit, "death is not the end. It is merely a doorway. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." A child in the front row giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "We learned this truth 50 years ago, when the flames came for us, when they licked at our skin and filled our lungs with smoke, when they should have sent us to glory." Blackwood's eyes found Marcus in the back pew. "But glory was not waiting for us, brother. Only darkness, only the cold embrace of nothing." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the pew itself was holding him down, wooden arms extending like tendrils to wrap around his ankles. "So we made a choice," Blackwood continued, his voice rising with passion. "We chose to return, to rebuild, to continue our sacred work in this place between worlds. And every Sunday night we gather to remember, to sing our songs and speak our prayers and wait for travelers like you." The congregation began to turn around. Marcus's scream caught in his throat as he saw their faces, or what was left of them. Charred bones showed through gaps in melted flesh. Empty eye sockets wept tears of ash. A woman in the third row opened her mouth to smile, and smoke poured out instead of breath. "You see, we need witnesses," Blackwood explained conversationally. "People to tell our story, to remember that we're still here, still serving the Lord in our own way. But the problem with witnesses is that they always want to leave." Marcus fought against the invisible bonds holding him, but they only tightened. The wooden pew creaked and groaned, reshaping itself around his body like a coffin. "The good news," Blackwood said, stepping down from the pulpit and walking slowly up the aisle, "is that leaving isn't really necessary. We have room for one more in our congregation, one more voice to add to our eternal song." The reverend stopped beside Marcus's pew, and the smell of charred flesh filled the air. Up close, Marcus could see that Blackwood's robes were still smoldering, tiny wisps of smoke rising from the fabric. "Tell me, brother," Blackwood whispered, leaning down until his ruined face was inches from Marcus's ear, "do you believe in resurrection?" Marcus tried to speak, to scream, to do anything but sit there paralyzed with terror, but no sound would come. "Ah," Blackwood nodded understandingly. "A man of little faith. No matter. Faith can be cultivated." He gestured to the congregation, and they began to sing again, the same mournful hymn Marcus had heard from the forest, but now he could understand the words. "Come home, weary traveler, come home to stay. The fire is warm here, it burns night and day. No more wandering, no more pain. In death's sweet embrace we live again." The candles began to flicker and dim. One by one, they guttered out, plunging the church into deeper darkness. But the singing continued, growing louder and more urgent with each verse. Marcus felt heat beginning to build around his feet. He looked down and saw flames licking at the base of his pew, spreading across the floor like spilled water. But these flames cast no light. They were darkness made manifest, shadows that burned. "Don't fight it," Blackwood advised gently. "The fire doesn't hurt after the first few moments. And once it's done its work, you'll understand. You'll see what we've seen, know what we know." The dark flames climbed higher, reaching Marcus's knees, his waist, his chest. They felt like ice rather than fire, a cold so intense it burned. His vision began to blur, and the last thing he saw was Blackwood's blackened smile. Welcome to the congregation, brother. Marcus woke to the sound of his car alarm. He was lying in the front seat of his rental car, slumped over the steering wheel. Bright morning sunlight streamed through the windows, and birds were singing in the trees around him. His phone was buzzing, full signal, 17 missed calls from his editor. He sat up slowly, his head pounding. The clock on his dashboard read 8:23 a.m. Had he fallen asleep while parked on the side of the road? It seemed impossible, but what other explanation was there? Marcus stepped out of the car and looked around. The forest looked different in daylight, ordinary, welcoming even. Spanish moss swayed gently in the morning breeze, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of traffic on the main highway. There was no dirt path leading into the woods, no sign that one had ever existed. He checked his recorder. Dead batteries, just as he remembered. But when he opened the battery compartment, he found something that made his blood run cold. The batteries weren't dead. They were melted, fused into black lumps of plastic and metal, and they smelled like smoke. Marcus drove back to Millfield in a daze, trying to convince himself it had all been a dream, a stress-induced hallucination brought on by too much coffee and too little sleep. But when he stopped at the same gas station where he talked to the elderly woman the day before, she took one look at him and went pale. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, crossing herself. "You went there, didn't you? You went looking for that church." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but his voice shook. The woman grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Look at your hands, son." Marcus looked down. His palms were covered in what looked like soot, dark smudges that wouldn't brush away. As he watched, more appeared on his fingertips, spreading slowly up his arms like a stain. "It marks the ones who've been inside," the woman said quietly. "The ones who've heard their song. You got out somehow, but you ain't free. Not really. They'll call you back, sooner or later. They always do." Marcus stumbled out of the gas station and made it to his car before his legs gave out. He sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching the dark stains spread across his skin like creeping shadows. His phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello, brother," came Reverend Blackwood's voice, clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat. "Thank you for visiting us last night. We do hope you'll come again soon. Perhaps next Sunday? The service begins at midnight." The line went dead. Marcus drove straight to the airport and caught the first flight back to Chicago. He told his editor the story was a dead end, filed his report, and tried to return to normal life. But normal was no longer possible. The stains on his hands grew darker each day, spreading up his arms like creeping vines. He had dreams every night, dreams of candlelight and hymns, of a white church standing in a forest clearing. And every Sunday at midnight, his phone would ring. He never answered, but he always listened to the voicemail. "The service is about to begin, brother. Your seat is waiting." 3 weeks after his return to Chicago, Marcus was found dead in his apartment. The official cause was smoke inhalation, though there was no fire and no source of smoke to be found. His hands were completely black, as if they'd been dipped in tar. The coroner noted one strange detail in his report. Despite the apparent burning, the victim's body smelled faintly of candle wax and old wood. That same night, residents of Millfield reported seeing lights in the deep woods again. And if you listened carefully through the Mississippi darkness, you could hear singing. 17 voices raised in mournful harmony, soon to be 18. The church that wasn't there yesterday still stands, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way on the backroads of Mississippi. The congregation is always looking for new members, and the service begins at midnight, every night, forever. The notification sound pierced through Detective Rachel Morrison's morning coffee routine like a blade through silence. Her phone screen illuminated with an urgent message from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. "Missing hiker, Banff National Park. Time sensitive. Report immediately." What she didn't know was that this case would challenge everything she believed about the wilderness, technology, and the thin veil between the living and the dead. Marcus Thompson was the kind of man who conquered mountains the way others conquered crossword puzzles, methodically, confidently, and always alone. The 34-year-old software engineer from Vancouver had been hiking the treacherous trails of Banff for over a decade, documenting every peak, every hidden valley, every secret the Canadian Rockies whispered to those brave enough to listen. His girlfriend, Jessica, had grown accustomed to his weekend disappearances into the wilderness. 3 days max, he'd promised her that Friday morning, kissing her goodbye at their downtown apartment. Just the Skyline Trail and back. You know how I need to clear my head before the big presentation. But Marcus never made it to Monday's presentation. He never made it home at all. The first sign of trouble came when his GPS tracker went silent at 2:47 a.m. on Sunday morning, somewhere deep in the backcountry near Mount Assiniboine. The second sign was the frantic call Jessica made to park rangers when Marcus failed to respond to her texts, calls, or the emergency satellite communicator she'd insisted he carry. By Sunday afternoon, search and rescue teams were combing through 40 square kilometers of some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. Helicopters buzzed overhead like mechanical vultures, their thermal imaging cameras scanning for any trace of the missing hiker. They found his campsite easily enough. Tent perfectly erected, sleeping bag still warm, camp stove with remnants of his last meal. His hiking boots set neatly outside the tent, as if he'd simply stepped out of them and vanished into the mountain air. But Marcus himself had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions that multiplied like shadows at sunset. Detective Morrison arrived at the search command post as dawn painted the mountain peaks in shades of blood orange. She'd worked missing persons cases before, but something about this one felt different. The complete lack of struggle, the organized campsite, the way Marcus seemed to have simply evaporated. It all felt wrong. "Any leads on his phone?" she asked Sergeant William Hayes, the grizzled search coordinator who'd been working these mountains for 23 years. "That's the strange part," Hayes replied, his weathered face creased with concern. "Phone's been pinging cell towers intermittently since he disappeared, but the signals are coming from impossible locations, inside solid rock faces, underwater in glacier lakes, from elevations no human could survive." Morrison felt her skin crawl. Equipment malfunction. That's what we thought. Until this morning. Hayes pulled out his tablet and opened the park's digital evidence folder. At 4:33 a.m., 3 photos uploaded to Marcus's cloud storage. They weren't there yesterday. The first photo showed Marcus's familiar smile against a backdrop of pine trees and mountain peaks. Standard hiking selfie. Timestamp reading Friday 6:15 p.m. Nothing unusual. The second photo was taken Saturday morning, showing his breakfast setup, with Mount Assiniboine looming majestically in the background. Again, completely normal. But the third photo made Morrison's blood freeze in her veins. The image was dark, grainy, as if taken in the dead of night with a dying phone battery. It showed what appeared to be Marcus from behind, walking along a narrow mountain trail. But there, just barely visible in the shadows behind him, was a tall, elongated figure that didn't look quite human. Its limbs were too long, its posture too unnatural, and its eyes, dear God, its eyes reflected the camera flash like those of a nocturnal predator. The timestamp on the photo read Sunday, 2:46 a.m., 1 minute before Marcus's GPS tracker went silent forever. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" Morrison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes shook his head. "Only you and the tech team. We've been trying to enhance the image, but every time we do, more details emerge that we wish we couldn't see." Morrison studied the photo more closely, zooming in on the mysterious figure. The more she looked, the more wrong everything became. The figure's shadow fell in the opposite direction from Marcus's, as if it existed in a different reality altogether. Its hands, if they could be called hands, seemed to have too many fingers, each one unnaturally long and ending in what looked like claws. But it was the figure's face that haunted her most. When she enhanced that portion of the image, she could make out features that were almost human but fundamentally wrong. The proportions were off, the bone structure too angular, and there was something about the mouth that suggested it was far too wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. We need to get a team up to that exact location, Morrison said, though every instinct in her body screamed against the idea. Hayes nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. The coordinates put it at Devil's Thumb Pass, a section of trail that's been closed to hikers for the past 15 years. Why closed? Too many disappearances. Too many unexplained incidents. The Park Service officially blamed it on unstable terrain and unpredictable weather patterns, but those of us who've worked these mountains long enough know there's something else up there, something that doesn't want to be found. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. How many disappearances? 17 confirmed cases since 1987. All experienced hikers. All vanished without a trace, just like Marcus. And in every case, their electronic devices continued transmitting for days after they went missing, sending signals from locations where no human could survive. The detective's mind raced. Were there ever any photos? Any digital evidence like this? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the imposing peaks that surrounded them. There was one case, back in 2019. A photographer named David Chun went missing in the same area. 3 days after he disappeared, his camera uploaded dozens of photos to his professional portfolio website. And the photos showed David being followed by the same kind of figure we see in Marcus's picture. But in David's photos, there were multiple figures, and they were getting closer with each shot. The final photo showed them surrounding him, the faces clearly visible, and they weren't human faces at all. Morrison's mouth went dry. What happened to those photos? They mysteriously disappeared from the website within hours. The hosting company claimed it was a technical glitch, but David's family swore they'd seen them. The Park Service buried the whole thing, classified it as an equipment malfunction and possible hoax. But you don't think it was a hoax? Hayes turned to face her, his eyes reflecting decades of mountain wisdom and hard-earned fear. Detective, I've lived in these mountains my entire life. I've seen things that would make city folks like you run screaming back to civilization. There are places up here where the rules of reality don't apply the same way they do down in the valleys. Devil's Thumb Pass is one of those places. Morrison felt her skeptical detective instincts warring with a growing sense of dread. We still need to investigate. That photo is evidence, and Marcus is still out there somewhere. Or something that was Marcus is still out there, Hayes corrected quietly. Before Morrison could respond, her phone buzzed with another notification. A new photo had just been uploaded to Marcus's cloud storage. With trembling fingers, she opened the image. This one was taken in daylight, showing a view from high up on a mountain ridge. But it wasn't the breathtaking vista that made her gasp. It was what was in the foreground. Scattered across the rocky ledge were pieces of hiking equipment. A torn backpack, a shattered water bottle, fragments of what looked like a GPS device. And there, partially hidden behind a large boulder, was what appeared to be a human hand reaching out desperately. Fingers clawed as if grasping for help that would never come. But the most terrifying detail was barely visible in the bottom corner of the image. The edge of a shadow that didn't belong to any natural formation. A darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent life, as if something massive and inhuman was standing just outside the camera's field of view, watching, waiting. The timestamp on this photo read Monday, 9:15 a.m. That was exactly 3 minutes ago. Morrison's blood turned to ice as she realized the horrifying implications. If Marcus was taking these photos, he was still alive. But if something else was using his phone to send these images, then they were dealing with an intelligence far more sinister than they could have imagined. "We need to get up there now," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Hayes nodded grimly. "I'll assemble a team. But detective, once we go up Devil's Thumb Pass, there's no guarantee all of us will come back down." As they prepared for what might be their final ascent into the Canadian wilderness, neither of them noticed the new notification that had just appeared on Morrison's phone, another photo uploading to Marcus's cloud storage. This one showed the search and rescue command post from an impossible angle, as if taken from high above by something that had no business being in the sky. And in the corner of that aerial photograph, barely visible but unmistakably there, were dozens of elongated shadows moving with purpose toward the base camp, their inhuman forms stretching across the mountain terrain, like fingers of darkness reaching out to claim their next victims. The hunt was about to begin, but the question that would haunt Morrison for the rest of her life was simple. Who exactly was hunting whom? As the rescue team prepared their equipment and checked their communications devices one final time, the mountains seemed to watch them with ancient, malevolent eyes. Somewhere up in the peaks, where the air grew thin and reality grew flexible, something was waiting patiently for their arrival. And Marcus Thompson's phone continued uploading photos that no living human should have been able to take, each image revealing more of a truth that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the wilderness, about survival, and about the thin boundary between the world of the living and whatever dark realm existed beyond it. The last photo uploaded before the team began their ascent showed a simple message scratched into a rock face in what looked like dried blood. "They're coming for you too." The timestamp read Monday, 9:47 a.m., the exact moment Detective Morrison took her first step up the Devil's Thumb Pass Trail, unknowingly walking into a nightmare that had been waiting decades for new victims to claim. The rain hammered against the grimy windows of the cramped Bloomsbury flat like skeletal fingers, demanding entry. Jessica pulled her threadbare sweater tighter around her shoulders as she squinted at her laptop screen, the cursor blinking mockingly at the end of an unfinished sentence. Her dissertation on Victorian literature was due in 3 days, and she hadn't slept properly in weeks. The flat was a nightmare of peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards that her student loan barely covered, but it was hers. At least, it felt like hers during the day. At night, when the building settled and the pipes groaned like dying things, she wasn't so sure. She'd found the old radio tucked behind a pile of moth-eaten books left by the previous tenant. It was one of those heavy, wooden affairs from the 1940s, with brass dials that had turned green with age. The cord was frayed beyond repair, ending in a plug that looked like it hadn't seen an outlet in decades. Jessica had meant to throw it away, but something about its solid presence comforted her in the lonely evenings. Now it sat on the windowsill, silent and harmless, just another relic in a flat full of someone else's forgotten things. The first time she heard it, Jessica thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. It was past midnight, and she'd been staring at the same paragraph for 2 hours when a soft hiss of static filled the room. She looked up, confused, scanning for the source. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then she heard the voice. "I should have listened to the warnings about this place." Jessica's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The voice was familiar in a way that made her skin crawl, but she couldn't place it. It was distant, crackling through what sounded like radio interference, but clear enough to understand every word. "I should have listened to the warnings about this place." The same sentence, repeated with identical inflection, identical timing. The static faded, leaving only the sound of rain and her own ragged breathing. Jessica stood on shaking legs and searched the flat. The neighbors were quiet. Her laptop was muted. Her phone was charging silently on the nightstand. She checked every electronic device twice, but nothing was on. Nothing except the unplugged radio. As she approached the windowsill, the static returned, louder this time, and with it came the voice again. "I should have listened to the warnings about this place." The brass dials weren't moving. The radio's wooden case was cold to the touch, but the voice was definitely coming from inside it, as impossible as that seemed. Jessica unplugged her laptop and phone, yanked every cord from every outlet. The building could be having electrical problems, she reasoned. Old wiring, power surges, radio frequencies bleeding through somehow. But the voice continued, patient and relentless. "I should have listened to the warnings about this place." Over and over, every 30 seconds, like a broken record stuck in an endless loop. Sleep became impossible. Jessica huddled on her bed, pillow pressed over her ears, but she could still hear it. The voice seemed to seep through the walls, through her bones, into the deepest parts of her brain. By morning, the radio was silent again. Jessica convinced herself it had been a stress-induced auditory hallucination. Final year students had breakdowns all the time. She'd heard about people hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there. The mind played tricks when pushed too far. She managed to write 3 more pages of her dissertation before exhaustion claimed her, and she fell asleep at her desk as afternoon light filtered through the dirty windows. She woke to the sound of her own voice. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. Jessica shot upright, heart hammering against her ribs. The voice was definitely hers, the same slight accent, the same nervous tremor she'd heard in recordings of herself. But she wasn't speaking. Her mouth was closed, lips pressed tight together in horror. The radio said exactly where she'd left it, unplugged and innocent, but the voice continued to pour from it like blood from a wound. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. Her own voice, speaking words she'd never said, warning about something she didn't understand. Jessica stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. This couldn't be happening. Radios didn't work without power. Dead electronics didn't broadcast voices, especially not the voice of the person listening to them. She grabbed her laptop and searched frantically for explanations. Radio waves, electromagnetic interference, psychological disorders, anything that could make sense of what she was experiencing. But deep down, she knew this wasn't science. This was something else entirely. The voice followed her to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even into the hallway outside her flat. No matter where she went, she could hear herself speaking those same 9 words, endlessly, hopelessly. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. What warnings? Jessica had never heard any warnings about the flat. Mrs. Chun, the landlady, had been eager to rent to her, practically shoving the keys into her hands before Jessica could ask too many questions about the previous tenant. The previous tenant. Jessica pulled out her phone and started calling. Mrs. Chun didn't answer, but the letting agency had records. After 20 minutes of being transferred between departments, she finally reached someone who could help. The flat on Gower Street. Oh yes, we remember that one. Bit of trouble with the last tenant, I'm afraid. What kind of trouble? Well, she was a student like yourself. Nice girl, very quiet. But she started calling about problems with the flat. Said she was hearing things, voices in walls. Claimed the place was haunted. The woman's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, love, I think the stress got to her. You know how it is with you university types. What happened to her? Found her in the bathroom 3 months ago. Overdose, they said. Sleeping pills. Left a note saying she should have listened to the warnings about the place, but no one knew what warnings she meant. Jessica's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. The voice continued, patient and eternal, speaking words that were both prophecy and epitaph. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. Night fell like a curtain across London, and Jessica sat in her kitchen, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills she'd bought for her insomnia. The radio's voice had grown stronger as darkness deepened, no longer confined to the living room. Now it seemed to come from everywhere. The pipes, the walls, the very air around her. Her own voice, warning her about warnings she'd never received. But she understood now. The previous tenant had tried to warn others, just as someone before her had probably tried to warn her. The cycle continued, voice after voice, trapped in the static between worlds, trying desperately to save the next victim. Jessica picked up her phone and started recording. If you're hearing this, get out now, she whispered into the microphone. Don't stay in the flat on Gower Street. Don't listen to the voices. Don't become another voice. But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. The radio's power didn't come from electricity. It fed on despair, on loneliness, on the slow erosion of sanity that came with isolation and stress. She could feel it happening, her voice joining the chorus, her words becoming part of the endless loop. Soon, someone else would rent the flat, and they would hear Jessica's voice warning them, just as she now heard the voice of the girl who'd come before. The sleeping pills rattled in their bottle like dice in a cup. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, while leaving the stains on Jessica's soul untouched. The radio crackled with static, preparing to broadcast its warning to the next listener, the next victim. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. Jessica's own voice, speaking from tomorrow, echoing back through time to this moment of terrible choice. She closed her eyes and tried not to listen, but the voice was inside her now, part of her, inescapable as her own heartbeat. In the morning, Mrs. Chin would find the flat empty except for an old radio and a bottle of pills. And sometime after that, another student would need a cheap place to stay, another young person far from home and desperate enough to ignore the whispers that came with the keys. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Voices through the static, warning about warnings never heard until it was too late. I should have listened to the warnings about this place. The radio played on, patient and eternal, broadcasting its message to an empty room, while somewhere in the static, Jessica's voice began to learn the words that would define her forever. And in the Bloomsbury flat, the rain kept falling, and the radio kept talking, and the warnings kept coming too late to save anyone at all. What I'm about to tell you happened in downtown Seattle, in a building where the elevators have been acting strange for months. The security guards whisper about it during their night shifts, but nobody talks about it during the day. Nobody wants to believe what the cameras captured on that foggy Tuesday evening in October. It started with a routine check of the surveillance footage. Detective Marcus Chun had seen thousands of hours of CCTV material, but nothing prepared him for what he discovered in the basement security room of the Meridian Tower at 3:47 a.m. on a sleepless Wednesday morning. The timestamp on the screen read 6:23 p.m., Tuesday, October 15th. A woman approached elevator Bank C on the 12th floor. She was ordinary in every way that mattered. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a navy blue coat and carrying a leather purse. Her name was Victoria Nash, a 34-year-old marketing consultant who worked for a firm on the 18th floor. Detective Chun watched as Victoria pressed the down button. The elevator doors opened immediately, as if it had been waiting for her. The fluorescent light inside flickered once, twice, then steadied. Victoria stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She pressed a button. The cameras couldn't capture which one from this angle, and turned to face the doors. Then something impossible happened. At exactly 6:24 and 17 seconds p.m., the screen erupted into static. Not the kind of interference you get from a bad connection or electrical storm. This was different. The static seemed to move, to writhe and pulse like something alive. For 37 seconds, the screen showed nothing but this dancing gray chaos. When the image cleared at 6:24 and 54 seconds p.m., the elevator was empty. Victoria Nash had vanished. Detective Chin rubbed his tired eyes and rewound the footage. He watched it again and again. Each time, the same impossible sequence played out. Woman enters elevator. Static. Empty elevator. But here's where the story takes a turn that would haunt Detective Chun for the rest of his career. The elevator never moved. According to the building's computerized system, Elevator C, 3 remained stationary on the 12th floor during the entire 37 seconds of static. The doors never opened on any other floor. The emergency stop button was never pressed. The elevator shaft sensors showed no unusual readings. Victoria Nash had simply ceased to exist. The first text message arrived at 6:31 p.m., 7 minutes after Victoria's disappearance. It was sent from her phone to her sister Jessica in Portland. Running late tonight. Don't wait up for my call. Everything is fine. Jessica later told police that the message felt wrong somehow. Victoria never used the phrase, everything is fine. She would have said all good, or I'm okay. But at the time, Jessica thought nothing of it. The second message came at 8:15 p.m., sent to Victoria's boyfriend David. Need some space to think. Going away for a few days. Please don't look for me. David immediately called Victoria's phone. It went straight to voicemail, but not the personalized message Victoria had recorded. Instead, he heard her voice saying words she had never spoken. You've reached Victoria. I can't come to the phone right now. I'm somewhere you can't follow. The building superintendent, a gruff man named Robert Mills, who had worked at Meridian Tower for 15 years, told Detective Chen something that made his blood run cold. "That elevator," Mills said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been acting up for months. Sometimes it stops between floors for no reason. Sometimes people get on it and come out different." "Different how?" Mills looked around nervously, as if the walls themselves were listening. "Last month, Mrs. Henderson from the 8th floor got stuck in that elevator for 20 minutes. When maintenance finally got her out, she kept saying she'd been riding it for hours. She was talking about floors that don't exist, a 47th floor where it's always winter, a basement level filled with old photographs of people nobody recognizes." "Did you report this?" "To who?" "The elevator company says there's nothing wrong with it mechanically. The building management thinks it's just old people getting confused. But I've seen the maintenance logs, Detective. That elevator has been serviced more times in the past 6 months than all the others combined." Detective Chin decided to examine the elevator himself. At 2 a.m., when the building was nearly empty, he rode elevator C, 3 from the ground floor to the 30th floor and back down. Nothing unusual happened, but as he stepped out on the 12th floor, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The floor indicator inside the elevator showed 13, but Meridian Tower didn't have a 13th floor. The investigation took a darker turn when Detective Chun discovered that Victoria Nash wasn't the first person to vanish in that elevator. Building records, which management had initially claimed were temporarily unavailable, revealed a pattern stretching back 8 months. In February, a janitor named Carlos Mendez had disappeared during his night shift. Security footage showed him entering elevator C, 3 on the 5th floor. Static, empty elevator. Carlos's family received text messages for 3 days after his disappearance, all saying he had found a better job and wouldn't be coming home. In May, an elderly woman named Ruth Blackwood, who was visiting her granddaughter on the 22nd floor, vanished in the same elevator. The static lasted 42 seconds that time. Ruth's phone sent a single message to her daughter. "I've found where the missing people go. It's not what you think." In August, a delivery driver named Marcus Torres disappeared. His truck was found running outside the building, hazard lights flashing. The security footage told the same impossible story. Man enters elevator, static, empty elevator. His phone sent messages for a week, all variations of "I'm where I need to be now." But it was the phone records that revealed the truly terrifying truth. All the missing people's phones were still active. They were sending messages, making calls, but not from anywhere on Earth that cellular towers could triangulate. The phone company's technical team ran multiple traces and came back with readings that shouldn't have been possible. According to their instruments, Victoria Nash's phone was transmitting from inside the Meridian Tower building, but from coordinates that existed in empty air between the 12th and 14th floors. The same impossible location where all the other missing phones were broadcasting from. Detective Chun arranged for a specialized team to examine the elevator shaft. What they found defied explanation. Between the 12th and 14th floors, in the space where the 13th floor should have been, the elevator shaft simply ended. Not physically. The concrete and steel continued as expected, but their electronic instruments registered a void in that space, a gap in reality itself. "It's like there's a pocket of nothingness," explained Dr. Amanda Torres, the physicist the police department had reluctantly consulted. "Our sensors can detect the structure of the building above and below, but in that specific area, there's an absence of something. I don't have the words for it." The elevator car itself revealed even more disturbing evidence. Scratches on the walls that hadn't been there during the previous inspection. Scratches that looked like words, carved by desperate fingernails. "We're still here. The doors won't open. It's always 6:24. And most chilling of all, new people keep coming." Detective Chen made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He decided to ride the elevator at exactly 6:24 p.m., hoping to trigger whatever phenomenon was stealing people from reality. On a gray Thursday afternoon, With backup teams stationed throughout the building, Detective Chen stepped into elevator C3 on the 12th floor. He pressed the button for the ground floor and turned to face the doors. At 6:24 and 17 seconds p.m., his radio crackled with static. The security team watching the monitors saw the familiar gray chaos consume their screens. 37 seconds of writhing static that seemed to mock human understanding. When the image cleared, Detective Chen was gone. But this time, something different happened. The elevator doors opened. Victoria Nash stepped out. She looked exactly as she had when she'd disappeared 2 weeks earlier. Same navy coat, same leather purse, same expression of mild confusion. But when the security team approached her, they noticed her eyes had changed. They were completely black. "Where is Detective Chen?" Officer Martinez asked. Victoria smiled, but it wasn't quite right. The expression didn't reach those black eyes. "He's with us now," she said in a voice that sounded like Victoria's, but carried echoes of other voices beneath it. "He's learning what we've learned, that there are spaces between spaces, times between times, places where the lost can be found." "What happened to you in that elevator?" Victoria's head tilted at an angle that seemed too sharp, too mechanical. "Nothing happened to me. Everything happened to everyone else. We're the ones who stayed. You're the ones who left." Before anyone could react, Victoria walked calmly to the stairwell and began descending. Security cameras tracked her progress down to the ground floor, through the lobby, and out onto the street. She was never seen again. But Detective Chen's phone began sending messages. The first one arrived at 7:15 p.m., sent to his partner. "I understand now. The elevator doesn't take people away. It shows them where they've always belonged." The second message went to his wife. "Don't mourn for me. I'm not gone. I'm just existing in the spaces you can't see." The building management sealed elevator C3 the next day, but employees reported that they could still hear it running at night. The soft ding of arrival, the whisper of opening doors, the sound of footsteps that belonged to no one visible. And sometimes, late at night when the building was empty, security guards would see the elevator indicator lights moving. Floor 12. Static. Floor 13. The floor that didn't exist. Floor 13, where the missing people weren't missing at all. They were just somewhere else, existing in the 37 seconds of static that stretched into forever, sending messages from a place between places, waiting for more people to join them in the space where time stopped at 6:24 and the doors never opened again. The Meridian Tower still stands in downtown Seattle. Elevator C3 remains sealed, but sometimes visitors report seeing a woman in a navy coat waiting by the elevator bank on the 12th floor. She smiles and waves, as if inviting them to join her. But the smart ones take the stairs, because in the space between the 12th and 14th floors, in the place that doesn't exist but somehow contains everyone who ever stepped into that elevator at 6:24 p.m., Victoria Nash and Detective Chen and all the others are still there, still waiting, still sending messages from the place where missing people go when the world forgets to look for them. And every day at 6:24 p.m., the elevator dings softly, its door sliding open to reveal an empty car that isn't empty at all, waiting for the next person who needs to learn that some disappearances aren't disappearances. They're arrivals. The GPS died first. Marcus watched the blood vanish from his phone screen as he drove deeper into the British Columbia wilderness. The rental car's navigation system had given up an hour ago, leaving him with nothing but a crumpled gas station map and the growing certainty that he was completely lost. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, fleeing the disaster that was his life in Vancouver. The divorce papers were still warm in his briefcase, along with the termination letter from a law firm where he'd worked for 12 years. At 42, Marcus felt like everything he'd built had crumbled in the span of a single week. The Rocky Mountains loomed ahead, their snow-capped peaks catching the last rays of daylight. He'd planned to reach Jasper before dark, but the winding mountain roads had other ideas. His fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, and the nearest town, according to his map, was still 50 miles away. That's when he saw the lights. At first, Marcus thought it was a trick of the dying sun reflecting off the mountains. But as he rounded another curve, the lights grew brighter, warmer. Street lamps, house windows glowing yellow in the gathering dusk. The sweet promise of civilization. A wooden sign appeared in his headlights. Welcome to Millbrook, population 847. Marcus had never heard of Millbrook, and it wasn't marked on his map. But relief flooded through him as he drove down what appeared to be the main street. Victorian-style houses lined both sides, their wraparound porches and gingerbread trim perfectly maintained. Street lamps cast pools of golden light every 30 feet. Smoke curled from several chimneys, and warm light spilled from shop windows. He pulled up to what looked like the town's only gas station. The pumps were old-fashioned but appeared functional, and a small convenience store attached to the main building had its open sign illuminated. Marcus climbed out of his car, stretching muscles cramped from hours of driving. The silence hit him like a physical force. No traffic, no voices, no dogs barking or music playing. Even the wind seemed to have died, leaving behind a quiet so complete it made his ears ring. Marcus looked around, suddenly aware that despite all the lights and signs of habitation, he hadn't seen a single person since entering Millbrook. He walked to the gas station door and pushed. It swung open with a cheerful chime, revealing shelves stocked with snacks, a coffee machine that gurgled warmly, and a register that displayed the current time, 7:42 p.m. "Hello," Marcus called out. His voice echoed strangely in the small space. "Anyone here?" No response. He grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, leaving a $10 bill on the counter. The coffee smelled fresh, so he poured himself a cup. It was perfect, exactly the right temperature, as if someone had just finished brewing it. Back outside, he filled his tank. The pump worked without requiring payment or a card, the numbers spinning as gasoline flowed. Marcus kept glancing around, expecting to see anyone. But the streets remained empty. Across from the gas station stood a diner called Betty's Kitchen. Neon signs advertised fresh pie and hot coffee, and through the large windows, he could see tables set with clean silverware and folded napkins. A chalkboard menu listed the day's specials in neat handwriting. Marcus's stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the diner looked inviting despite the absence of customers or staff. He pushed through the front door, another cheerful bell announcing his arrival. The smell of home cooking filled the air, roast beef, fresh bread, apple pie. A coffee pot sat on a burner behind the counter, steam rising from its spout. Place settings for dozens of customers covered every table, as if the restaurant was expecting a busy evening rush. "Hello," Marcus called again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered him. But it wasn't the oppressive silence of abandonment. It felt expectant, as if the diner was simply waiting for something to happen. A plate sat on the counter, still warm to the touch. Pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, exactly the kind of comfort food Marcus craved after his terrible week. A handwritten note beside it read, "For the traveler, enjoy your meal. Betty." Marcus looked around one more time, then sat at the counter. The food was delicious. Better than anything he'd tasted in years. As he ate, he studied the diner more carefully. Photographs covered the walls, pictures of the town throughout the decades. Founding Day celebrations, high school graduations, harvest festivals. In every photo, the people looked happy, prosperous, normal. But something nagged at him about the pictures. He couldn't quite put his finger on it until he realized what was bothering him. The faces. In photograph after photograph, spanning what looked like 40 or 50 years, the same faces appeared. Not aging, not changing. The same man cutting ribbons at grand openings in 1985 and 2019. The same woman serving cake at a birthday party in 1992 and 2018. Marcus pushed his plate away, appetite suddenly gone. He left money on the counter and walked back outside. The town remained eerily quiet, but more lights had come on. Every house now glowed warmly, as if families were settling in for the evening. Television sets flickered behind curtains. Kitchen windows revealed dinner tables set for meals that would never be eaten. At the end of Main Street, Marcus found a small hotel called the Mountain View Inn. The lobby door stood open, revealing a cozy interior with a crackling fireplace and fresh flowers on the registration desk. A brass bell sat beside a leather-bound guest book, open to today's date. Only one name was written there in elegant script: Marcus Thompson, room 12. His blood ran cold. He hadn't told anyone his name. He hadn't made a reservation. He'd never even heard of this town until an hour ago. With trembling hands, he picked up the old-fashioned key hanging from a hook marked 12. It was warm to the touch, as if someone had just been holding it. Room 12 was on the second floor, at the end of a hallway lined with antique wallpaper and oil paintings of mountain scenes. Marcus unlocked the door and found a perfectly appointed room waiting for him. His suitcase, the one he'd left in his car, sat on the bed, already unpacked. His clothes hung in the closet. His toiletries were arranged on the bathroom counter. A fire crackled in the small fireplace, and hot tea waited on the nightstand, still steaming. Marcus sank into the room's only chair, his mind reeling. This was impossible. Someone would have had to break into his car, steal his belongings, and arrange them here. But who? He hadn't seen a single person since arriving in Millbrook. He pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen showed no service, where the carrier bars should be. Even more disturbing, when he tried to access his GPS app, it showed his location as blank. Not unknown location, or GPS unavailable. Just blank, as if he had somehow stepped outside the boundaries of the mapped world. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion finally overtook him around midnight. Marcus dozed fitfully in the chair, startling awake at every small sound. The house settling, wind through the eaves, the distant sound of what might have been footsteps in the hallway. He woke to bright sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of breakfast cooking somewhere in the hotel. His body ached from sleeping in the chair, but he felt oddly refreshed, as if he'd had the best night's sleep in years. Downstairs, the hotel dining room was set for breakfast. Fresh coffee, scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast waited on a plate at what was obviously his table, the only one set for a single person. A folded newspaper sat beside his orange juice, open to the weather page. The forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures. The newspaper was dated today, but the masthead read the Millbrook Gazette in elaborate script. Marcus had never heard of such a publication, and a quick scan of the articles revealed they were all about local events, a town council meeting, the high school's upcoming production of Our Town, the annual Founders' Day celebration planned for next month. Everything seemed perfectly normal, except for the fact that the town appeared to be populated entirely by ghosts. After breakfast, Marcus decided to explore more systematically. He walked every street in Millbrook, peering into windows, trying doors, calling out greetings. Every business appeared to be open and operating. The library had books arranged on tables, as if patrons had just stepped away. The barber shop had fresh towels and a chair positioned for the next customer. The post office had mail sorted into boxes, letters and packages, waiting for delivery. But nowhere, in any building or on any street, did he find another living soul. As the day wore on, Marcus began to notice other details that didn't quite make sense. The cars parked along the streets all had British Columbia license plates, but they were models from different eras. A 1960s Chevrolet sat next to a 2015 Honda, both looking freshly washed and maintained. The styles of clothing in the shop windows ranged from 1950s dresses to contemporary jeans, all displayed as if they were current fashion. Most unsettling of all, when Marcus tried to leave Millbrook, he found he couldn't. Every road leading out of town simply curved back around to the main street. He drove for hours, following what should have been the highway back to civilization, only to find himself pulling up to the welcome sign again and again. By evening, panic had set in. Marcus stood in the town square, shouting at the empty streets. "Where is everyone? What is this place? Let me out. Let me go home." His voice echoed off the buildings and faded into silence. No windows opened. No doors creaked. No concerned neighbors came to investigate the commotion, but as he turned to walk back to the hotel, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision, a curtain twitching in an upstairs window, a shadow passing behind frosted glass, the suggestion of a face peering out from behind a door. They were there, watching, waiting. That night, Marcus barricaded himself in his hotel room, pushing the dresser against the door and checking the windows obsessively. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of empty streets, filling with people who had no faces, no voices, no substance beyond the suggestion of presence. He woke to find fresh clothes laid out for him, clothes he didn't remember packing. The barricade had been moved aside without a sound, and breakfast waited downstairs as if nothing had happened. Days blended together in Millbrook. Marcus stopped trying to leave, stopped shouting at the empty streets. The town provided everything he needed: food, shelter, even entertainment. The movie theater showed different films every night, the projector running without an operator. The library had every book he'd ever wanted to read, many he'd never heard of, all perfectly organized and waiting. It should have been paradise for someone running from a broken life. No responsibilities, no failures, no divorce papers or termination letters. Just a peaceful town that catered to his every need without judgment or expectation. But the isolation was driving him mad. Marcus began talking to himself, having long conversations with imaginary townspeople. He assigned names and personalities to the houses, created elaborate backstories for the businesses. The baker was a cheerful woman named Margaret who took pride in her sourdough. The librarian was an elderly gentleman called Professor Williams, who wore tweed jackets and knew everything about local history. None of them were real, but they were better than the crushing loneliness that threatened to swallow him whole. On what might have been his 10th day in Millbrook, time had become fluid, meaningless. Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring the town hall, a grand Victorian building he'd somehow overlooked before, he found records dating back to Millbrook's founding in 1887. The town had been a mining settlement, prosperous and growing until 1962, when something had gone wrong. The records became vague after that date, filled with references to the incident and temporary relocations and pending resolution of the situation. The last official entry was dated December 15, 1962. All residents have been safely evacuated, pending cleanup efforts. Town to remain under quarantine until further notice. There was no further notice. No record of anyone ever returning. No explanation of what had required evacuation and quarantine. But the most chilling discovery was a map of the region from 1961, showing Millbrook clearly marked along with roads, railways, and neighboring communities. Marcus compared it to modern maps he found in the library, maps that showed the same geographical features, but with the crucial difference: Millbrook was gone. Not abandoned or renamed, simply absent, as if it had never existed at all. That night, Marcus stood in the town square and spoke to the darkness. "I know you're there," he said quietly. "I know you're listening. What happened to you? What happened to this place?" For the first time since arriving in Millbrook, he got an answer. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of voices. Not words, exactly, but the suggestion of conversation, laughter, children playing. The lights in the houses flickered in a pattern that almost seemed intentional, as if the entire town was trying to communicate. And then Marcus understood. The evacuation hadn't been complete. Some residents had refused to leave, had hidden when the authorities came, had chosen to stay with their homes rather than abandon everything they'd built. When the cleanup crews arrived, they'd found an empty town and declared the operation successful. But Millbrook's remaining residents were still there, trapped between existing and not existing, between the world that remembered them and the world that had forgotten them entirely. They couldn't leave. Some combination of the original contamination and their own stubborn attachment to home had bound them to this place between places. And now Marcus was bound too. He'd been running from his old life so desperately that he'd stumbled into their trap, a pocket of reality where broken things went to hide from a world that no longer wanted them. The town had provided for him because it recognized a kindred spirit, someone else who had been abandoned, discarded, forgotten. As this realization settled over him, Marcus saw them clearly for the first time. Translucent figures emerged from doorways and windows, generations of Millbrook's residents who had chosen to stay when staying became impossible. They weren't malevolent or hungry for life force or any of the things ghost stories usually featured. They were simply lost, existing in the spaces between moments, keeping their town alive through sheer force of will and nostalgia. They welcomed him with gentle smiles and nods, finally showing themselves now that he understood. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a neighbor. The town had been waiting for someone like him, someone who needed what they offered as much as they needed what he brought. Proof that Millbrook could still matter to someone, still provide refuge for those the world had discarded. Marcus never tried to leave again. His divorce was finalized without him. His apartment lease expired. His few friends eventually stopped wondering what had happened to the lawyer who'd disappeared on a drive to clear his head. The world moved on without him, as it had moved on without Millbrook decades earlier. But in the spaces between existing and not existing, between memory and forgetting, Millbrook thrived. The town had its first living resident in over 60 years, and Marcus had found a place where his failures and losses couldn't follow him. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if other travelers might find their way to Millbrook, people running from lives that had become too heavy to carry, seeking refuge in a place the world had forgotten to erase completely. He hoped they would. The town had room for more neighbors, and Marcus had learned that some kinds of loneliness could only be cured by sharing them with others who understood. The gas station stayed open, its pumps ready for desperate travelers. Betty's kitchen kept fresh coffee brewing and warm meals waiting. The Mountain View Inn maintained its registry, always ready for guests who needed a place to disappear. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of British Columbia, a town that shouldn't exist continues to offer sanctuary to those who need it most, visible only to people who have already lost everything and have nowhere left to run but forward into the spaces between the world's memory and its forgetting. The sound that woke Principal Catherine Mitchell at 3:17 a.m. wasn't supposed to exist. Not in Riverside Elementary, not after the construction crew had promised complete silence during night hours. But there it was, the unmistakable scraping of tiny fingernails against wood, echoing through the empty hallways of her school. What Catherine didn't know, as she grabbed her flashlight and car keys, was that she was about to uncover a secret that had been buried for over 2 centuries. A secret that would turn her quiet Boston elementary school into a nightmare that would haunt the city for years to come. The renovation of Riverside Elementary was supposed to be routine. Built in 1952 on what was once farmland in the outskirts of Boston, the school needed a new foundation and updated plumbing. When the construction crew broke ground in the basement on that foggy October morning, Foreman Jack Thompson expected to find nothing more than old pipes and maybe some historical debris. Instead, his excavator hit something that made a sound like breaking china. "Stop the machine." Jack shouted to his operator, Danny Rodriguez. The grinding of the excavator ceased, leaving an eerie silence in the basement. Jack jumped down into the freshly dug trench and brushed away the loose dirt with his gloved hands. What he found made his blood run cold. A small wooden coffin, no bigger than a child's toy box, lay cracked open in the earth. Inside, wrapped in rotting fabric, were the unmistakable remains of a child. But it wasn't just one coffin. As Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim basement lighting, he could see the edges of at least a dozen more small caskets scattered throughout the excavation site. "Jesus Christ," Danny whispered, peering over the edge. "Is that what I think it is?" Before Jack could answer, his phone buzzed. Principal Mitchell's number flashed on the screen. "Jack, I need you to stop all work immediately." Her voice was strained, almost panicked. "Something's happening in the school. The children, they're reporting things. Strange things." Jack looked down at the broken coffin, at the tiny skull that seemed to stare back at him through empty sockets, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I think I know why." 8-year-old Madison Clark had always been a quiet child, the type who preferred reading in corners to playing on the playground. But when she walked into her third-grade classroom on the Tuesday after the basement excavation began, she wasn't quiet anymore. "There's a boy sitting in my seat," she told her teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Hayes, pointing to her usual desk by the window. Mrs. Hayes looked at the empty chair, then back at Madison's pale face. "Sweetie, I don't see anyone there." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "He's wearing old clothes, like from a costume, and he's really, really cold. I can feel it from here." Mrs. Hayes knelt down to Madison's level, concerned. The child's breath was visible in small puffs, even though the classroom thermostat read a comfortable 72 degrees. "Madison, why don't you sit at Jessica's table today? She's absent, so you'll have it all to yourself." But as Madison reluctantly moved to the other desk, Mrs. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that the temperature around Madison's usual seat had indeed dropped significantly. She made a mental note to call maintenance about the heating system. By noon, 3 more children in different grades had reported similar sightings. A girl in a torn dress in the library, a boy with mud on his shoes standing by the water fountain, a child crying in the bathroom stall, though no one was there when the teachers checked. Principal Mitchell called an emergency staff meeting for after school. "I need to know if any of you have noticed anything unusual," she began, studying the faces of her 12 teachers. "The children are reporting, well, they're reporting seeing other children who aren't enrolled here." The teachers exchanged glances. Finally, 4th grade teacher Robert Kim spoke up. "Actually, yes. Yesterday during reading time, I could have sworn I saw a child standing in the back corner of my room. When I looked directly, no one was there, but several of my students kept glancing in that direction and shivering." "The temperature," added kindergarten teacher Lisa Chen. "My room has been freezing cold in certain spots, but only certain spots. The maintenance team says the heating system is working perfectly." Catherine felt her stomach drop. She thought about the phone call from Jack that morning, his shaky voice describing what they'd found in the basement. 23 small coffins. 23 children, none older than 10, buried in what appeared to be an unmarked family cemetery from the 1800s. That evening, Catherine decided to visit the school herself. She needed to see the basement to understand what they were dealing with. As she unlocked the front door of Riverside Elementary, the familiar smell of chalk and disinfectant was overpowered by something else, something damp and earthy, like freshly turned soil. The basement stairs creaked under her weight as she descended into the construction area. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the carefully excavated burial site. The tiny coffins had been respectfully arranged by the construction crew, each one a heartbreaking reminder of lives cut tragically short. But it was the sounds that made Catherine freeze in terror. Soft giggling echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Children's voices, whispering in old-fashioned speech patterns she could barely understand. The scraping sound she'd heard that morning returned, louder now, more insistent. And then she saw them. Translucent figures of children, no more solid than morning mist, playing among their own grave sites. A girl in a faded blue dress chased a boy in knickers and suspenders around the coffins. Another child sat cross-legged, apparently playing with marbles that weren't there. They looked up at Catherine with hollow, longing eyes. "Play with us," whispered a small voice. "We've been alone so long." Catherine's flashlight flickered and died. In the complete darkness, she heard the sound of dozens of small feet running up the basement stairs. The children were heading into the school. The next morning brought chaos. Every single student at Riverside Elementary reported seeing ghost children in their classrooms. Not just glimpses this time, full manifestations. The ghostly children sat in empty desks, played in corners, and followed living students through the hallways. 3rd grader Michael Torres came to school with bite marks on his arm. "The dead boy tried to make me stay and play forever," he told the school nurse, his eyes wide with terror. He said he was lonely. 5th grader Chloe Williams refused to use the bathroom alone after a ghost girl trapped her in a stall for 20 minutes, begging her to stay and be my friend in the ground. The situation escalated when kindergartner Tyler Brooks disappeared during recess. Teachers found him an hour later in the basement, sitting peacefully among the excavated coffins, having a tea party with empty air. "They're not mean," Tyler explained to his terrified teacher. "They just want friends, but they keep asking me to sleep in the boxes with them." That afternoon, Catherine made the hardest decision of her career. She called every parent and announced that school would be closed indefinitely. But closing the school didn't solve the problem. It made it worse. With no living children to interact with during the day, the ghost children became increasingly desperate. They began leaving the school grounds, following Riverside Elementary students to their homes. The Peterson family woke to find their daughter Emma's bedroom filled with ghostly children, all begging her to come back to school. The Martinez family couldn't get their son Carlos to sleep, as dead children pressed their faces against his bedroom window every night, tapping with skeletal fingers. The city of Boston was in crisis. Parents kept their children indoors. Local news crews camped outside the school. Paranormal investigators arrived from across the country, each with their own theories and ineffective solutions. Dr. Patricia Fleming, a historian from Boston University, finally provided answers. After researching old city records, she discovered that the land had been the site of the Riverside Foundling Home, an orphanage that operated from 1847 to 1854. A scarlet fever outbreak had killed 23 children in a single winter. With no family to claim them, the children had been buried in a small cemetery behind the building. When the orphanage was demolished in 1855, the graves were supposed to be relocated to a proper cemetery. But corruption and carelessness meant the children were simply forgotten. Their burial site lost to time until Riverside Elementary was built over their resting place a century later. "They're not evil," Dr. Fleming explained to the packed town hall meeting. "They're lost souls who died far from home, surrounded by strangers. They've been alone for over 170 years. When the construction disturbed their rest and they encountered living children for the first time in decades, they simply wanted what they'd been denied in life: friendship, play, family." But understanding the ghosts didn't make them less dangerous. The dead children's desperation was growing stronger. They began trying to drag living children into the basement, convinced that if the living children joined them in death, they'd finally have permanent playmates. 8-year-old Grace Murphy was pulled halfway down the basement stairs by invisible hands before her father managed to drag her back. 7-year-old David Chun was found sleepwalking toward school at 2 a.m., later claiming that the girl in the white dress had invited him to a party underground. The breaking point came on Halloween night. The barrier between the living and dead was weakest, and the ghost children made their most aggressive attempt yet. Every child who had ever attended Riverside Elementary found themselves drawn to the school by an irresistible compulsion. Parents across the city woke to find empty beds. Over 300 children stood in the schoolyard at midnight, their eyes blank, walking slowly toward the basement entrance, where the ghost children waited with outstretched arms. "Come play forever," the dead children whispered in unison. "Come sleep in the earth with us. We'll never be lonely again." Police and firefighters formed a human barrier, but they couldn't physically stop the entranced children without risking injury. It seemed like the ghost children would finally get their wish for eternal companions. That's when Catherine Mitchell stepped forward with a desperate plan. She had spent weeks researching the children's lives, learning their names from old orphanage records. She knew their stories, their fears, their dreams that had been cut short by disease and death. Standing at the entrance to the basement, Catherine began to speak not to the living children, but to the dead ones. "Emma Thornton," she called into the darkness. "You were 7 when you died. You loved dolls and wanted to be a teacher." A ghostly figure materialized, a small girl in a tattered dress. "Thomas Brennan, you were 6. You collected buttons and missed your mother." Another ghost child appeared. One by one, Catherine called out the names and stories of all 23 children. As she spoke, the ghostly figures became more solid, more present. The living children's trance began to weaken. "You've been waiting so long for someone to remember you," Catherine continued, tears streaming down her face. "But taking these children won't heal your loneliness. It will only create more lost souls." The ghost of Emma Thornton stepped forward, her hollow eyes filled with tears that would never fall. "We just want to matter," the little ghost whispered. "We want someone to remember that we lived." "I remember," Catherine said firmly. "We all remember now. You were children who deserved love and life and play. You mattered then, and you matter now. But these living children have their own lives to live, their own dreams to chase." She gestured to the entranced students. "Let them go. And I promise you this, I'll make sure your stories are told. I'll make sure you're never forgotten again." The dead children looked at each other, then back at Catherine. Slowly, Emma Thornton nodded. "Will you visit us sometimes?" she asked. "Will you remember our names?" "Every day," Catherine promised. The ghost children began to fade, but not disappearing entirely. Instead, they retreated back toward their burial site, still visible but no longer reaching for the living. The entranced students blinked and looked around in confusion as the supernatural hold over them broke. The next morning, Catherine kept her promise. She established the Riverside Memorial Garden above the basement burial site. 23 small headstones bore the names and brief life stories of the forgotten orphans. The basement was sealed, but respectfully, with a small window where visitors could leave flowers and toys. The school reopened a month later. The ghost children still appeared occasionally, but they no longer tried to drag living students into death. Instead, they seemed content to watch from the edges, finally at peace knowing they were remembered. Students at Riverside Elementary learned to coexist with their supernatural classmates. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, teachers would notice an extra shadow in the corner or feel a cold spot by the windows. Children reported gentle touches on their shoulders during tests, as if the ghost children were offering encouragement. Madison Clark, now in 4th grade, often left drawings on her desk for Emma Thornton. "She likes the ones with flowers," Madison would tell anyone who asked. The ghost children had found what they'd been seeking for over a century, not eternal playmates captured through death, but something far more precious: acknowledgement, remembrance, and the peace that comes with being seen. But late at night, when the school was empty and the moon cast long shadows through the hallways, visitors still reported the sound of children playing games that had been popular 2 centuries ago. The laughter was no longer desperate or frightening. It was simply the joy of children who had finally found their place in the world, even in death. Catherine Mitchell, now known locally as the woman who could speak to ghosts, continued to serve as principal. She made it her mission to research every supernatural occurrence at the school, ensuring that no spirit ever felt forgotten again. And in the basement, sealed behind glass but still visible, 23 small coffins rested peacefully, surrounded by fresh flowers and childhood treasures left by living students who had learned that remembering the dead was just as important as caring for the living. The story of Riverside Elementary became a legend in Boston, a reminder that sometimes the most frightening hauntings come not from evil spirits, but from souls who simply want to be remembered. The ghost children had found their peace not through scaring the living, but through the simple act of being acknowledged and honored. But every October, on the anniversary of that Halloween night, locals still avoid walking past the school after midnight, because that's when the ghost children's laughter is loudest, when the games are most active, and when the barrier between the living and dead grows thin enough that sometimes, just sometimes, a living child might catch a glimpse of playmates from another century, forever young, forever playing, forever remembered. The phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m., piercing through the silence of Detective Marcus Kane's apartment like a knife through flesh. After 23 years on the Chicago Police Department, Marcus had learned to dread calls that came in the dead of night. They never brought good news. "Detective Kane speaking," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Detective, this is dispatch. We have a situation. There's a man at the precinct demanding to see you specifically. Says he has information about the Riverside murders from 1994. Marcus sat up straight, his blood running cold. The Riverside murders. 3 brutal killings that had haunted his career for 3 decades. The case that made him question everything he thought he knew about evil. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked into interview room 3 and froze. The man sitting across from the metal table looked exactly like the police sketch they had created 30 years ago. Same hollow cheeks, same piercing gray eyes, same thin lips that seemed to curl into a permanent smirk. But that was impossible. The man they were looking for would be in his 70s by now. This man looked barely 40. "Detective Kane," the man said, his voice carrying a strange echo that seemed to bounce off the walls longer than it should. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" Marcus asked, settling into his chair but keeping his hand near his service weapon. "My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I'm here to confess to the Riverside murders." Marcus studied the man's face. "Thomas Blackwood died in a car accident in 1995. I have the death certificate." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp. "Death is such a relative term, don't you think, detective?" A chill ran down Marcus's spine, but he pressed on. He had heard countless false confessions over the years. "All right, Mr. Blackwood, tell me about the first victim." "Jessica Martinez, 24 years old, found in Lincoln Park on October 13th, 1994. She was jogging when I approached her near the old oak tree by the pond. I told her I was lost, asked for directions." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. She was so trusting, so kind, right up until the end. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Those details had never been released to the public. The specific location, the method of approach, it was all correct. "What did you do to her?" "I used a curved blade, detective. Started from the left side of her neck, just below the ear. Made sure she could see her own reflection in the water as the life drained from her eyes." Thomas tilted his head. "You found 3 drops of candle wax at the scene, didn't you? Red candle wax, about 6 feet from the body." Marcus's hand trembled as he wrote down the details. The candle wax had been their most closely guarded piece of evidence. Only 5 people knew about it. 4 of them were dead, and Marcus was the 5th. "Tell me about the second victim," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert Chin. Poor Robert. He was walking home from his late shift at the hospital on November 2nd. I followed him for 3 blocks before making my move in that alley behind the pharmacy on Elm Street. Did you know he was left-handed, detective? He tried to defend himself with his left hand. That's why you found those defensive wounds on his left forearm and palm. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Robertson being left-handed was a detail that had only been discovered during the autopsy. It was never in any police report, never mentioned to the media. How could this man possibly know? And the third victim? Marcus asked, though every instinct screamed at him to leave the room. Thomas's expression grew darker, more sinister. Catherine Williams, the school teacher. She was grading papers late in her classroom on November 18th, room 204, Roosevelt Elementary. I watched her through the window for an hour before I went inside. She was wearing a blue cardigan with small pearl buttons. When she saw me, she dropped her red pen. It rolled under the desk marked Amy Peterson. That was the little girl who sat in the 3rd row, 2nd seat. Marcus dropped his pen. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. These weren't just accurate details. They were impossibly specific details that no living person could know. Details that hadn't been documented anywhere because they were too minute, too insignificant. How do you know all this? Marcus whispered. Thomas leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, his form seemed to flicker like a bad television signal. Because I was there, detective. I've been waiting 30 years to tell someone, waiting for the right person to listen. But you're dead. I saw the accident report. Your car went off the bridge into the Chicago River. They never found your body, but no one could have survived that crash. Oh, I had died all right, Thomas said, his voice taking on an otherworldly quality. But some sins are too heavy for the grave to hold. Some guilt burns too bright for death to extinguish. The fluorescent lights above began to flicker, casting eerie shadows across Thomas's face. You see, detective, I didn't just kill those 3 people. I killed 12 others, across 3 states, over 5 years, and every single night since my death, I've relived each murder, every scream, every plea for mercy, every final breath. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. This isn't possible. You're not real. I'm as real as the nightmares you've had about Catherine Williams, Thomas said, and Marcus's blood froze. He had never told anyone about those nightmares. I know about them because I've been in your dreams, detective. In all your dreams. The dreams of every cop who worked these cases. We're all connected now, bound by the unsolved sins of the past. The temperature in the room plummeted. Marcus could see his breath now, and frost began forming on the metal table between them. I can give you every detail of every murder I committed, Thomas continued. Solve cases that have haunted precincts across the Midwest. But there's a price. What price? Thomas's form flickered again, and for a brief moment, Marcus saw something else, something rotted and decomposed, with hollow eye sockets and exposed bone. You have to carry my burden now. Every detail I share, every case I help you solve, becomes part of you. You'll dream my dreams, see through my eyes, feel what my victims felt. Marcus wanted to run, wanted to scream, but he found himself leaning forward instead. Why? Why would you do this? Because the dead can't rest when justice sleeps, detective. And because there are others like me. Others who died with blood on their hands and secrets in their graves. I'm just the first. Over the next 3 hours, Thomas provided details on 9 more murders across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Names, dates, locations, methods, all delivered with the casual precision of someone reading from a grocery list. With each confession, Marcus felt something cold and alien settling into his mind, like ice crystals forming in his brain. When dawn finally broke, Thomas began to fade, becoming translucent in the morning light streaming through the small window. Wait, Marcus called out. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? Thomas smiled one last time, his voice now just an echo. Check the evidence locker, detective. Box 247C. Look for what you didn't find 30 years ago. And then he was gone. Marcus sat alone in the interview room for another hour, staring at his notes. 12 pages of confessions, written in his own handwriting, but containing details he had never known. Details he shouldn't have been able to know. Against his better judgment, he made his way to the evidence locker. Box 247C contained evidence from the Catherine Williams crime scene. Marcus had gone through it hundreds of times over the years, memorizing every item, every photograph, every fiber sample. But now, beneath the stack of photographs he knew by heart, was something new. A small envelope, yellowed with age, with his name written on it in Catherine Williams's distinctive handwriting, the same handwriting he had studied from her grade book and lesson plans. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a message that made his blood run cold. Detective Kane, if you're reading this, then Thomas found you. I hid this the night he killed me, hoping someone would understand someday. He's not the only one. There are others in the shadows, others who died with unfinished business. They're all waiting for someone strong enough to carry their truth. Be careful who you trust in the dark. The dead have long memories and longer reach. Catherine Williams, November 18th, 1994 inch. At the bottom of the page was something that shouldn't have been possible. A photograph of Marcus Kane standing outside the precinct, taken just hours earlier, with a timestamp of 3:17 a.m. Marcus's hand shook as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about solving cold cases. This was about something far more sinister, something that blurred the line between justice and supernatural vengeance. As he walked out of the evidence room, Marcus felt eyes watching him from every shadow, heard whispers echoing from empty hallways. The dead were talking, and they had more stories to tell. That night, Marcus Kane would have the first of many dreams that weren't his own. Dreams filled with the faces of victims he had never met, in cities he had never visited, crying out for justice from beyond the grave. The cold cases were solving themselves, but at a price that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because once the dead start talking, they never stop. And in the deepest, darkest corner of his mind, Marcus began to wonder if someday, Someone else would sit in interview room 3 at 3:17 a.m., listening to his own confession from beyond the grave. The cycle was just beginning.